I'm a full-time practicing artist since about 2008, and back then I was more of a textile artist and illustrator, and I made the most of my work was based around little fabric birds, which were, this is one of the ones from that time, really quite sort of simple stylized pieces of little fabric scraps, and they continued over the years to evolve into these detailed species studies that that they've become now. And all throughout that time I was selling my work, making wholesale orders for shops and selling directly through my website. And because I was doing it full time, making that volume of work, it was really painful on my hands. So at some point I had to introduce a different way of making, which became paper mache. So that sort of started life as these little animal heads that were for the wall. So those two things, the fabric birds and the paper mache, were running alongside each other for quite a while. And then 2016, me and my husband moved to Walthamstow, and we really didn't know the area at all at that time, but we had a couple of friends that lived here, and we sort of vaguely knew it was quite a creative area. And the following year, 2017, was an art trail year, so it was the first time discovering the art trail, and managed to get around a few events at that time, and it was such a joy. It was really lovely, sort of welcome to this creative area and to see all this incredible varied creativity flourishing everywhere. And back then I had a studio in central London at Cockpit Arts. I don't know if anybody has heard of that place, but it's a really wonderful, supportive, creative community, which I'd loved being at, but it was a 2-hour commute now going from Walthamstow, so that was a bit of a pain. And discovering the art trail and this community existing here, I started to think maybe it's time to leave. So I looked for a studio, and happened to find where I am now, which is at Switchboard Studios in Blackwell's Lane. And so that was 2018, I think, and 2019 was an art trail year again. So I signed myself up, and I had hoped there might have been some people at the studio that wanted to join me, but there wasn't. so I had to do it on my own, which I was quite nervous about. So I got my mum along for some moral support, and it was wonderful. We just had such a gorgeous weekend. Everybody that came, that took the trouble to find us because we're so hidden away, just really lovely, interested people, and we had such great conversations with them all. So yeah, it was just a lovely positive experience that I enjoyed more probably than the open studios I used to have at Cockpit, because you had to do that, you had to take part in it, it was part of the contract. But the art trail, everybody involved is doing it because they want to do it, because they want to open up their spaces and meet people and share and discuss, and it just all feels just wonderfully celebratory, and yeah, it has a hugely positive impact on the community and for bonding people. So yeah, I've loved it. And for me personally, it's been the connection with this local community of artists that I don't know that I would have found otherwise. I don't know how else I might have entered that world if it wasn't for the art trail. And that's offered me collaborations and widened my creative practice. And so yes, thank you, Art Trail. 2017's Art Trail, looking through the guide that year, I came across Sandy Sutton's work, who's here this evening. And she, if you don't know her work, she makes wonderfully fabulous recycled plastic sculptures of animals, but I hadn't managed, I think it just didn't coincide with when I was available, but I didn't manage to see her work that time. So it wasn't until the run-up for the art trail in 2019 that Sandy and I connected through Instagram, and we made a point to visit each other's exhibitions, and we instantly hit it off. We work obviously very similarly, each exploring the animal kingdom and conservation, and both using waste materials to build our work. So thinking about the art trail in 21, and because I wasn't really sure that I wanted to do it on my own again, I was thinking about how the theme of climate change and possible futures really connected with what Sandy and I both explore in our work. So I proposed the idea to Sandy that we could do something together, and she said that would be great, and she wanted to invite another artist, Helen Mora, who also works with discarded materials, but in a entirely different way to the way that Sandy and I work. So it sort of opened up all these brilliant ideas of something that would be incredibly different, a sort of group show of all this different work. So we were doing it at Switchboard. Downstairs at Switchboard we have this great event space, but it's a huge open area. So Sandy came up with this brilliant idea that we could create a pathway that would lead through the room and would connect up all the different things that we had on show, and we'd each be making our own work to go inside it, so it's separately working. But at that point I realised the small scale of my work, this sort of size, wasn't going to fill this huge room. So I was going to have to make something specifically for the art trail that would be a lot bigger. And I'd seen something, again, maybe it was on Instagram, about the second-hand clothing trade in Accra in Ghana, and how vast amounts of unsellable clothing that's donated to charity shops in the UK, if it can't be sold in those charity shops, then it gets shipped out to Ghana, and there's just so much of it, sort of huge quantities that just isn't usable. So it was horrible footage of cattle atop these mountains of discarded clothing that was spilling out into the sea, and really quite disturbing stuff to see was happening. So around that time, Trade, the textile charity, had opened a shop in Walthamstow, and I thought that would be a great connection. So I contacted them to ask if there was a way to access any unsellable clothing donations that they'd received. So they invited me to their warehouse, and I sorted out the sorts of colours that I wanted to make my work, and lugged 4 bin bags full of old clothing back to the studio, and set to work building 3 large sculptures of Walthamstow wildlife, which you can see 2 of there. So they were built out of old cardboard boxes and wood offcuts for the frame inside, and then I took apart the fabric, clothing, and patchworked them together to build the fur and skin for those pieces. So yeah, they were my contribution to the exhibition, and Helen had made a projection using found plastics that she'd manipulated into a sort of nature scene, and she'd made a soundscape playing with different materials she'd found, and Sandy had her beautiful plastic animal sculptures dotted around, and it was just wonderful. It just led people, having this pathway made a participatory event, that they could go on this meander through the space and give them time to reflect on the problems of waste and the impact on the natural environment. But because it was so colourful, and it was animals, and there was the magic of this projection and sound, it was just really positive, joyous experience. It was maybe an upsetting, difficult subject, but it had been explored in a really joyful way. And I've never really collaborated with other artists before. It was quite a new experience for me, but it was really positive, and sharing that sense of achievement with other people, so much more, a greater experience to be shared. The pandemic played a bit of a big role, really, because at the beginning of 2020 all my work just disappeared. That was, you know, no more orders coming in, and it was terrifying, but it suddenly freed up all this time and an opportunity to do something different, to explore some different ideas. So I found the best way for me to handle that anxiety was that I just fully immersed myself in making art, whatever it was, and it would vary from day to day, and it was really random tangents of making giant masks, animal heads that became these, you can see them, there's a monkey, yeah, these big wearable costumes. And I carved sticks that I found in the park and made them into all animal spirits, and painted bad taxidermy that I found examples of the internet to sort of work through feelings of anxiety. And then at some point I think on Netflix I found this fantastic fungi documentary which explored all the wondrous properties of fungi, and was instantly captivated, as I'm sure everybody else who watched it was, and quite quickly found Merlin Sheldrake and his wonderful book Entangled Life, which also explores fungi. And then I found a time-lapse video that he'd made of mushrooms fruiting from a copy of his book. And it just sparked an idea for something that I was in search of, which at that time I'd been making these animal head sculptures, which are these little ones here, which is cardboard and paper pulp. And I was thinking about personal experiences of mental illness, of depression, anxiety, and grief, and how isolating those things can be. But those weren't quite working on their own. It sort of didn't really have enough idea behind it. But then the time lapse sort of sparked this final connection, I suppose, I was looking for, which sort of was all kinds of different things really. But thinking about the medicinal properties of certain mushrooms, and the use of psilocybin in treating depression, which I think I'd already heard quite a lot about, and then its powers to alter states of mind, and then mycelium networks underground connecting up trees and the mutually beneficial relationships between the trees and the fungi, and then thinking about the mycelium, if I could get it to cover my animal heads, then blanketing them in white, and that sort of thinking about ideas about wrapping someone in cotton wool to protect them. And yeah, all these different things were sort of coming to mind, and it was all sort of just seemed the perfect way to comment on the importance of community and connection in healthy minds, you know, the importance of it. So I just had the basics, that I knew that you could fruit mushrooms from paper and cardboard. And I remembered, again from the art trail, that there was a mushroom farm in E17, Fat Fox Mushrooms. So I reached out to them, Lex and Ben, who very kindly invited me over, and we sat and discussed my idea, and they very generously shared their expert knowledge, and then they supplied me with mushroom spores. And I went away and built my sculptures, which the first one was this bear head, which was stashed away in a kitchen cupboard for 3 months and tended to every day with some water spritzing. And throughout that 3-month period, this was cardboard originally, but now this is the white mycelium that's formed all over the head. And when I took it out of the cupboard, there was a little, it's dropped off now because it just dried and dropped off, but it was a little cluster of mushrooms that started to fruit just around the eye. But the second piece I tried with some pink oyster mushrooms. Yeah, they really grew. This is one of the stages. So I'd taken them out of the cupboard then, and they were on the dining room table, and I just photographed them every day as these as these magical mushrooms appeared. And it was an incredible process, and I had no idea what to expect at all. Never having even grown mushrooms normally before, but yeah, I thought initially that it might all sort of dissolve and disintegrate as the mushrooms grew, and but it hasn't. It's dried as this sort of rock hard, leathery head, which has now sort of opened up all these other ideas for me. And you know, could I combine? Oh, that was one dropping off. You know, the wearable heads I'd been making before, could I do it that size, and could it be a wearable mask in this mushroom form? And could I collaborate with the costume maker to make a costume to go with it? Or could it be a dance performance that, you know, maybe it's a collaboration with some dancers or some musicians? And I'd like to create a time lapse of my own to watch the process, because it's so fascinating. And then, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful to have an exhibition where there's a live growing installation that you can see as a visitor the process of the mycelium growing over the form? Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go yet. It's still very early days, but yeah, it's really, yeah, this again, these local connections and sharing enthusiasms with other people have opened up all these different possibilities of where my work might go next. And so thinking, which I suppose I hadn't really done that much, but thinking about where I was artistically before I moved to Walthamstow, which was just a textile and paper artist at that time, working very small scale and working alone. But now in Walthamstow, I'm part of the Art Trail. I've just, yeah, blown up in scale and medium, and become a collaborator and made all these wonderful connections. So again, thank you very much to all the artillery team and the Art Trail, and yeah, it's been wonderful being part of it so far.